From my story to your story, let's talk about grief. I will share my own grief journey, along with interviewing others about their path of sorrow and healing. I hope that you, the listener, will hear something that helps as you navigate your own grief, and that God will be glorified along the way. This content is meant as a discussion and not to give professional help. Let's get started.
There is a grief that comes from taking care of someone that has dementia or Alzheimer's and slowly passes right before your eyes. Really, when the night your dad went into the hospital, you went from your mom and dad capable of staying by themselves at home, even though they were checked on or taking meals, and because your dad, we were all really starting to realize how far the dementia had progressed, but your dad really covered it really well.
Oh, yes.
And so you immediately realized that night, my mom can't even stay by herself,
That night when we got in that car, if you know my personality, I'm a fixer. If something is wrong, I'm going to try to fix it.
Sure.
So in my mind, that whole ride home, I was like, okay, what can I do? What can I do with mom? What can we do? We got to get this, we got to do that. We got to get her out of her house. We're going to, be permanent here. Oh, I have steps.
Right.
I can remember. And so I did the same thing. When Donnie died, I just put it back. And when Dad died, and I got through that week of funeral and that kind of thing, I can't help him. He's in heaven. I moved that to the side, and she became my focus.
Right.
My total focus.
That's my Nana. If you're watching on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you are listening on the podcast, please like and follow. We would love for you to do that now to help our channel grow and become a blessing to others.
But I think he began to see that he couldn't take care of mom. And I can remember going and picking him up for church. Dad, if he was there 15 minutes early, he was late. And I'm that way to this day. And mom, with the dementia, just didn't always cooperate. And we'd go over there to pick him up on Sunday morning, and he would come out, and you're going to have to go in there. And there was weeks of that.
It's like, I've tried to get her dressed for an hour. You go in there and deal with it.
You go, and I go in there, and she'd say, I don't know what's wrong with your dad. No, Mom, it's, you've been up for 2 hours. But anyway, when I began to think back on it, I thought, she's just getting older. She can't do what she could do before. It wasn't until after his death and we started really going through the house. Like I said, I would be in that house all the time. But, I'm looking through cabinets and drawers.
Things,
and I wasn't inspecting. I was just looking. I'd take their laundry and take it home. And, like I said, I'd always bring food. And I'd take my dishes home so she didn't have to do them. Or I'd do them there, whatever. And I think Dad knew. Mm-hmm. And I think that day when he was so upset in the hospital about he didn't want to die, I think it was because he knew I was going to meet this head on.
Right. And realize how bad it is.
I began looking through pictures
how much it progressed.
Of her face. Mom had a look.
Yes. I agree. Like an empty.
It was an empty look.
An empty look.
An empty look. And I would say that she was anywhere between 6 and 7 years with dementia. But the stages.
The stages. And for people out there listening that are wondering, some of the things for us, the texting, at first I think we just thought.
Well, she always texted in China.
It was like it spelled, and I had gotten to where I could decipher it.
Yep. There was enough
Donnie
of it.
would hand me the phone, and none of the words were actually look like English words, but I would take each letter and figure out what letter was beside it.
She couldn't see, and she wouldn't put her glasses on.
Yeah,
because she could spell anything.
But she was just like, she was an English teacher. Of course, it mattered to her, and it was just like, I don't care. And I would try to tell her about how you could do spell correct, so that if you just type in a little something, it would bring things up. And she'd say, no, that frustrates me. Mm-hmm. Yes. And but I remember 2 specific things that helped us realize, okay, this is really happening. Pacing.
Yes.
we would sit down, we would go over there to see them or whatever and sit
Yes.
down, and she just could not
Couldn't
sit
sit
there. She
still.
would get up and pace and look out windows and just pace and
Mm-hmm.
pace.
She would pace, or she would sit in a chair often. Literally, this is what it does. And I know not everyone saw that. And again, might not be with everyone, but she would sit in a chair and immediately stand up and go to another one. And immediately stand up and go to the window. And I don't mean minutes. I mean seconds.
Constant.
And, it just...
Did you go through the thing when she first started repeating things or saying things over and over or doing something like pacing? What was the progression of, I'm sure at first you kept trying to explain it, trying to reason, saying, Mom, just go sit down or whatever, or, nothing's changed outside since you looked out the window. I'm sure you said that.
Yes, yes.
Or, like having to tell her over and over that Pop's in heaven and seeing the disappointment on her face. It takes a little while, doesn't it, for your brain to realize, okay, they really don't get what I'm saying.
And I'm not helping. That was difficult. I knew not to argue with her.
Okay.
That is something,
And the second thing that really made me realize how far it had progressed, she was always a fabulous cook. And Pop would say, well, why don't you and Donnie come down here for dinner? Okay. We'd stop by and, one thing would be ready. One thing would be in the oven. Stuff would be boiling on the stove. Mm-hmm. And it was another half hour to an hour. And she, just during dinner, she'd remember, and bring something else. Or she would burn things that she'd never burnt. And, those were definitely the things that made me realize.
And her appearance.
Okay. Yes, because she's always so meticulous.
Right. Yes.
So,
right.
Let's talk about the time frame in which you cared for your mother. There is a grief that comes from watching a loved one die slowly, whether it's physically or whether it's mentally. Is that an accurate statement? Okay.
Very much.
So describe that. And to get your thoughts going, what were there any ways your mom was still the same?
I've thought of that question. I've had people ask me that. And I think you realized it too. No.
She really had become a different person in front of you.
I used to tell you when you would come over, I sit sometimes and look to try to find. We would talk about things at first. I would always try to go back in her, back talking about family, younger, things that happened, show her pictures and those kinds of things. And she would laugh and chuckle. And I think maybe related, but it wasn't very long before those stories were still funny.
But not knowing why.
She didn't. She wouldn't forget people's names. She did real well.
That's true.
She knew your name every time you came. She knew the kids. She knew your kids. She knew my kids. My grandkids were with her every day. So she was good with them. We tried to stay very active. We would take walks. And she did well with that. She was eating real well. Many things changed, but those kinds of things. But I felt like I was taking care of somebody, some little sweet lady,
someone different than your mom,
but not my mother, not at all.
What was changing daily in front of your eyes?
Well,
starting like at first,
I kind of worried. Yeah, she
progressed.
did pretty good. Like with our other house, when we lived in the house when my dad passed away, we lived in a 2-story house. I was real worried about the steps. And I would always go behind her, so that we could both go down the steps. I'm not sure.
So you could catch her and you could both fall down, right?
Maybe. But she told me one day, she said, no, I'm glad those steps are there because it gives me exercise. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of a glimpse of my mom, because if you knew her, she never sat still. So anyway, those things began to change. And honestly, I think when I look back, Donnie, 4 months later, and in the middle there, her being diagnosed, the heart attack, the heart surgery, Dad died. She is in the midst of this dementia and COVID hit.
Right. Oh, true. Right in the midst of
Things
all that.
were closed down. she couldn't figure out why we didn't go places. And we were as confused. It was anyone that lived through that. Did we take her
anywhere? Should we go anywhere?
And we couldn't, because if you remember, we couldn't go out to dinner. We couldn't take her any place. And I think she thought we were just going to lock her away. And I would try to explain the best that I could, but I knew she didn't understand. She couldn't figure out why we weren't going to church, because she thought it was wonderful that we were now on TV. Because we would bring, we would put James up there and we would listen to the service, and she'd get 2 or 3 minutes into it and she'd just get up and walk out. And I'm like, Mom, this is church. And that's another one of those times where she loved to read. Oh, she loved to read and puzzles and that kind of thing. And we bought her every kind of puzzle book. I brought a lot of her stuff from home. She had her own bedroom suit. We brought that out of the house. And in the midst of that, we did make a move. We moved to a 1-story house that we had to do quite a bit of work on. And that through her, with a person with dementia, and the more that I dealt with it, the more that I learned. And I know a whole lot more now. Still, and I know it's different with every person, but the more you change things,
right,
the worse it is for them.
Okay.
And you, trust me. So all of those, and I can remember telling her, Mom, if I don't work at that house, we're never going to move in that house. But anyway, so then we moved, and she had just lost her home. She had a new home in mind, and then right after that we moved. We never would have done that, but I was so scared of those steps.
Right.
I was deathly afraid. And she also, and you saw this, she also anyone could tell her anything to do, and she'd listen. If I said, Mom, go right there and sit down, you can count on the fact she was not going to do it. She was going to go somewhere else, or she's at least going to sit in a different chair. It just, I don't know if that's
associate
a kid,
with
her
the
daughter,
parent
trying to tell her what to do.
Well,
she
okay.
She wasn't going to have it.
Well, I remember with my grandmother's dementia, the same thing. There was like a person they pick out that, not necessarily they're mean and hateful if they don't go that route.
That was me.
But that was you for your mom.
Me.
And I remember my mom, it was her mother, with her versus the other sisters and brothers.
There are some things that are very frightening. She loved to get blankets. And she would wrap blankets around. And that was fine and well. But when she would go to get up and recline her, she forgot how to put the thing down. So she's trying to get up. And I'll never forget one day I was like, Mom, wait, hang on. I'm coming. Don't move. You've got a blanket wrapped around your foot. She had it. It was too long. And of course she moved. She fell and she broke her arm. And I remember telling you, I felt awful. I felt, here I can't even take care of my mom. But you soon learn, and
she was just doing her own thing.
She was. I was always Kathy, but I was not her daughter. I was her nurse. I was her mother. I was her sister.
I don't think I realized that until much later.
We didn't have that relationship for, a very long time. She didn't understand. She knew I was always there, and she called me by name. She never referred to me as anything else. But then, you question God sometimes, and I was raised in a pastor's home. I was a pastor's kid. I was on staff, worked in a Christian ministry for 30 plus. I knew what to say to people. Right. I knew what to say to try to make them feel better. And I meant what I said.
Right.
I wasn't passing it off. I thought it was going to help. And in some ways it did. I'm sure it did. But I didn't know how it felt. My mom and dad, from the time we were young, would pray. And at night, Donnie and I both would hear them. And we knew they were on their knees beside their bed. Until I got married, I saw this every night of my life. And they would pray for everyone. They begged God to save their families in their home, like their brothers, sisters, moms, dads, aunts, uncles, they would pray. And my dad would specifically pray for the ministry and that God would never allow him to do anything that would bring harm to the ministry. My mom would pray the same thing. And she began to go into things. It got to where I couldn't take her in public anywhere because I never knew what she was going to say. But she began to talk in ways she wasn't supposed to talk. And what was really funny is right before she would, and you can attest to this, she would look and she would say, I'm going to say something real ugly and she's going to get mad. and she would. And I'm going, no, Mom.
Don't say it.
Don't say that. Don't say that. And she would. So I told the kids. And I said, I just want you to know, because my daughter was thrown in, well, one of my sons. It happened to him first.
I think it happened to Justin, too.
And Chris. Well, Justin was the one I was going to talk about. So Justin loved to come and bring her sugar, as you did. And he had brought her an apple cake from an Amish market. He would, every time he would go up there, he would bring her that back. And she would eat it. And I was going in to fill up her water cup in the kitchen from the sunroom. And so Justin stayed in there. And I'd already told him. So he came barreling out of that sunroom, and that boy was purple. And he might not appreciate me telling this, but the look on his face, and I knew. And he looked, and he didn't know whether he was about to lose it. He was about to crack up. And he said, I believed you. I promise I believed every word, but my man just said, I told you. And for me, I was so taken back. I was like, God, what have you done?
Right. How could someone who gave their life to you, lived a godly life?
I didn't know you knew. We couldn't even say shoot. We grew up with no slang. I mean,
no slang,
you do not say that.
No potty mouth.
You certainly do not say shut up. What is wrong?
Or call somebody stupid or
oh
whatever.
My goodness, you didn't do any of that. And she just, I mean, the only thing she did was she was from Kentucky, so she swanied instead of swear. Remember, she would always say, I swanny.
Swanny, yes.
I guess that made it better. But never. I didn't even know she knew those words. And they were I just never knew when they were coming out. But many times she would say, I can remember her telling you one time, I'm going to say something, she's not going to like it. And she did, and I didn't.
And she would talk about you like a caregiver, but I didn't realize that till the end, because I can remember she'd look at me and say, she's not treating me right. She's mad at me today. And all of us knew you took not just good care, but exceptional care. Every need was met, plus more.
Her,
but she would say something like that, and you're just like, I don't even know what to say. I don't,
Well, that's why I was always glad when people just showed up, because I didn't want them to think I treated her one way when people were there,
Yes. And things happened in her mind. I remember she thought Pop was across the road.
That was very difficult. Well, we would sit out on the front porch, and it's another one of those times. She would always want to sit out when the sun was shining right in her face. And I would say, Mom, I'd try to get her to go earlier, and she wouldn't want to. So I say, well, why don't we wait till the sun goes down a little bit? And that way it won't be right in your face. Well, finally, we'd get there. And she'd sit out on that front porch. It was almost every day. She'd say, look down there. Look down that road your dad and Donnie go down there fighting over that tricycle. And I remember telling her, Mom, I'd almost like to see that. I would. And then there was another fellow that she knew that was always trying to come out of my neighbor's window.
There you go.
Yeah, it was one day I went in and we had put a Christmas tree in her room, and we took her to Hobby Lobby. Katie and I took her to Hobby Lobby, and we had the most fun. I told her, I said, whatever you want on that tree. And I'm like, you know me and matching. I was like, ooh. But she picked the beautiful things. So a few days later, I came in there, and she was standing at the tree, and she'd taken several balls off the tree and put them under them and had smashed them. And I said, Mom, what are you doing? And she goes, that bear is not coming out of that tree tonight. And I said, bear? And she said, yes. I said, but Mom, look at these bulbs. I said, and you're doing that in your bare foot? What's going to happen? Bare feet? What's going to happen? She said, well, I'm probably going to cut my feet all up. So some things would dawn on her, and other things would not. And we laugh because we had to find humor in some of it, because we loved her.
Yes.
There was no doubt. But there were some times, I would go to sit down at night, and I remember my husband would look at me. He said, we going to laugh tonight? We going to cry?
Oh, wow.
Every night.
That's a thought.
Every night. Are we going to laugh, or are we going to cry?
So you feel like it's such a cruel way, and you look at God horrible. And say, you could stop this. Why do people die?
Or why is she talking in a way she would never talk in front of her grandkids, especially?
Thinking Pop was across the road and not with her, or Donnie, Pop were fighting, these were things that never happened.
didn't
Like
happen.
Donnie and Pop did not fight about things, and
My dad never left
Pop would
her
have never
anywhere.
been across the road, and
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So, that's hard to reason. Well, it doesn't make sense, and so that's what I want to know is how you dealt with. Well, I remember coming to see you and sitting down talking to you on the couch, and I remember a section of time where you just said, cried and admitted, I am really struggling with why God would
You
allow
were the
this.
only
And
one I told that to.
And I hope I can say that right
Oh,
now.
yeah, you
but
can.
The thing that bothered me too about like Pop, Nan and Pop prayed. You were talking about praying on their knees. They literally begged God to take them both. I mean, they wanted to die in a car accident, as sick as that is, because they wanted to go together.
Well,
and they didn't
I
want
kinda
it to
wanted them
linger,
to,
and they didn't
although,
want everybody to have to take care of them.
Right.
And the one thing they did not want was some kind of long drawn out mental illness, or the one going before the other and having to be taken care of. And Pop went before Nan. He had prayed that wouldn't happen. Nan had dementia. They had prayed it wouldn't be that kind of situation. And so I think it's worthy to pray that, but I think it's also a reminder of this, as Ellie said, it's sin-filled world.
Broken world.
That,
Yes.
that for me, I had to kind of detach myself from how someone dies, in the sense like I could sit and overanalyze how Don passed or how this person passed, and I have just kind of separated myself mentally, that God is not up there saying, oh, I want you to suffer and I want it to happen quickly and whatever. I just feel like I've had to say everyone's going to pass, and there's going to be a variety of ways, and it's because of the curse of sin.
Right.
Is how I rationalize it. Now, that doesn't make what you're going through at the time okay or easy.
Right. But I don't think I really, like I said, I haven't unwrapped all these layers, and I really hadn't dealt with any of the grief.
Right.
I truly hadn't. I had pushed it so far. But one thing probably the number one thing that I struggle with my mom, is my dad and mom were so close.
Right.
She was so lost. She searched for him every single day from the time she woke up to the time she went to bed. But we took her to Myrtle Beach, and one morning, it was about 5:30. We were at the beach, and she came in fully dressed, which is something she never did. I helped her do everything. She had her shoes, socks tied, ready to go, and her sweater. And she said, your dad's coming to get me this morning, and I didn't want to wake you, but I didn't want you to wake up and me be gone. Now, this was just into it. This was, Dad had died in January, so this was in May. Okay. So it wasn't, But I remember taking her out on the patio, and we were looking at the ocean, and I said, Mom, Dad's not going to come get you. And just to see the disappointment, it seemed like every time I would try to explain that he was in heaven, it would disappoint her again. So she grieved. She just didn't. Yes. She grieved the entire time.
Right.
And you couldn't put her at ease. She would say, Pop's in heaven. She would say, he was in heaven before his feet got cold. And she said that all the time. And I always would ask her, and she would laugh, but she missed him so much.
When you think about that, a person with dementia is going to forget what you just told them. So like you said, they are reliving
over
that.
We're talking a 5-minute span.
Yes, over and over and over. And
there's no calming them. My kids all teased me when we moved into the new house, because all my walls were very pastel-y, there were grays, teals, blues. And my sons kept teasing me that I could see no color but gray. Are you going to get a new gray car? This, that, and the other. But I did that because literally there's a palette of colors that are good for people with dementia.
Probably calming.
And they're calming colors. And I was trying everything. So I have a piano, and I've played for many years. And she would want me to go sit down and play the piano. But she would sing every verse of the songs that I would play. And she asked me to play Beulah Land.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, I don't know that I can do this, but my fingers work. She sang that song. And she started crying. And then every time I'd play, she would cry. So I just stopped.
Wow.
Because I didn't think that was helping. And when she would say something about, why isn't your dad coming? Why is he not here? I just stopped explaining, and I would talk about something different.
Okay.
I would
like
just
divert.
go a different way and not really even enter into that world, because you didn't know what it was going to do.
So how did you cope with your feelings toward God there in that time frame? Where you just, you really struggled with being angry at God for, this is the way my mom is ending her life.
I just thought it was so unfair.
And it's a demeaning death. For your mom to have taken such good care of her body,
Yes.
such good care of her mind, served the Lord faithfully, and really, worked hard to do things the way the scriptures say, to have a clean mind, to have a clean mouth, to have a clean heart. And then to feel like she didn't have control over making sure those things
she didn't want to read her
happened.
Bible. Everything, but it wasn't just the Bible. Everything agitated her. I don't know if it made her remember she should be able to do those things. I don't know, but I just questioned God. Why? And of course you do the pity party. I don't want
Did you have trouble just getting up, making yourself read and pray?
I did, but I kept doing it.
But you did it anyway. I think that's important. You did it anyway.
I did. And I wasn't in church for the first time in my entire life. And I've always not only been in church, but I've been involved. And I missed it. You were home with her. But I was home with her. And church. There was no way. And I didn't want anybody else to have to miss church. I questioned God because my mom was so sad. Mm. And it was not until, I think it was even this last Sunday, when maybe even Wednesday night, where he said, Wednesday night. He said, the world's not intended like this.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's where I began to think, wait a minute. Anyway, Mom continued to decline. She got to the point where she couldn't really do anything for herself. I'd get her up in the morning and take her back and forth to the bathroom, and her eating began to change.
Right.
And that was very frightening. But then I noticed, and I think I even talked with you about it, I noticed that it didn't matter what I gave her, even water, she would choke.
Right.
So
yes.
We thought she had a UTI 2 times, and for dementia patients, that is unearthing. I can't even, that's a whole nother story. But I thought from some of the signs I was seeing, that's what it was. And God had blessed us with a group of doctors that would come in. She had checkups every 6 weeks in the home. A wonderful lady that was a doctor would come in, and they would weigh her, take her vitals, check anything. If she was sick, I could call them before that. If she needed an x-ray, an ultrasound, we've had all those in our home. And so I called them, and they came out and they did some blood work. And she said, I got the call that night, and I could tell they didn't want to tell me. And she'd been in my home so many times, and I could hear it in her voice. And she said, it's not a UTI. And you know how we talked, and we did. She said, you know how we talked about hospice? You're going to have to call them. You need to call them. They will help you. That was almost it was as bad as them telling me they're putting Dad on a vent. It was just like, I thought, oh no. And my mom, my dad and mom both, I knew they didn't want to live on a ventilator. But my mother's mom had had a feeding tube.
Right.
And she was adamant. She had told me in no uncertain terms, not since this, but all my, adult life, I don't ever want to be on a feeding tube. I do not want to be on a feeding tube. So I thought, what am I going to do? If hospice comes in, the first thing they're going to do is put her on a feeding tube because she's not getting any nutrients. She got to where, if you remember, she didn't want sugar.
Right.
She didn't
right.
want anything to eat.
Right.
Whatsoever.
Which was strange for her, because she loves sugar.
Yes, and
like
I
me.
remember her telling you one day, around in the middle of the day or something, that she was hungry. And I told you I couldn't get her to eat. So she told you she was hungry, of course. And so I can remember bringing like an applesauce pouch and got her to, I hadn't been able to do that in days. But she even choked on that.
Right. She would aspirate it, right?
She
technically
did.
into the
she
lung.
She actually did aspirate.
She had pneumonia a couple
and
times.
She had aspirated pneumonia, and she hadn't had anything to chew. There was nothing.
Okay.
So I told my husband, and again, this is that questioning God. I was like, I had to sign for my dad to die, and now I have to sign one of two things. They're either going to do a feeding tube, which I know she didn't want.
Doesn't want.
Or I'm going to sign a paper that they're going to starve her to death.
Yeah.
And that's the way I looked at it.
Yes.
And I really did begin to pray. And on Sunday afternoon, the first hospice lady came, and she sat down and she began to go through things. They asked me questions. They saw Mom. This, that, and the other. And she told me how they'd set up. She said at the beginning, we'll come like once a week. And, we're not there. She's good. But we're transitioning.
Right,
it's
we're
coming.
transitioning.
And so
I remember you were distraught. I do remember that.
well, to me, it happened all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It just happened that part. We went from all this other to, oh, here we go.
Well, and I wasn't even there with you. I mean, in and out once in a while, but compared to what you're going through every day. But I remember even thinking, oh my goodness, this is like, we're just going to literally let the person starve to death. And I will say this, not that it's bothered me like you chose that. I don't mean it like that. There was no choice to it. It was part of the dying process. But I heard a lady talking about that just in the past few weeks. And what she's, from a nurse's standpoint, she was saying, you are not letting this person starve. This is a scientific way that the body system shut down to die. This is your person dying. You are not letting them starve. And not that I really thought that that's what happened, but when she said it that way, I thought, oh, that's helpful.
I would like to have known that.
Yeah,
earlier.
You'd like to have somebody say that to you that way.
Yes, and I know that now. But when they came in, they did the x-ray, and she had already aspirated, like I said, and she had pneumonia.
Right.
But the lady sat down and she began to go through all the things of what would take place. And she said, now I want you to understand that this is hard for some people, or for everyone, I'm sure. She said, but we will not do any IVs whatsoever. It doesn't matter what happens.
Okay.
She said, and we never do a feeding tube. And to be honest, at that point, I thought that was a God time.
Right, because it's not like it was taken out of your hands a little bit.
I didn't have it, because she said that only prolongs nature.
Right.
That only prolongs the inevitable. And she said, like cancer patients, things like that, she said the treatment's totally different because they have a chance of recovery. We just help them in the middle. So they began to come, and truthfully, that time went pretty fast. They were once a week, and then it was 2 times a week. Mm-hmm. And then it was every day. And we had the sweetest hospice nurse.
They were wonderful.
They were but I just never knew what Mom was going to say. But anyway, it went well. They
didn't care. They're used to that.
And they didn't, and they kept telling me that, but that didn't make my nerves any easier. But anyway, on this, I don't know if I can get through this, but I'll try. The Sunday before, first of all, the nights. I think that was part of the reason I struggled. There was no sleep, especially after she broke her arm, and that was at the onset. We had a baby camera, a monitor, that we would sleep, because I was scared to death she would get up and get hurt, and I wouldn't know it, or she would need me, or I knew physically, I didn't think she could get out the locks and that kind of stuff, but still, there were so many things, and so every time she would move, and my mom, she wasn't a quiet sleeper, so I was constantly, waking up during that time. And I could say I never slept a full night. Mm-hmm. But when we went into that last week, it was on Sunday. when I went into the kitchen, her room was off the kitchen. She had a little suite back there, and I knew something was wrong. I never shut her door, but I closed it a little bit because she always said that people would come in and talk to her during the night. So
yes.
I didn't want it closed. I wanted her to feel like she was closed off, yet there was a lot of guessing during those years. But anyway, my husband was right behind me, and he knew it too. Your body begins to do things, and her body began to deplete. And I went in, and she didn't feel good, and she hadn't had that problem ever. So she just really didn't.
Right.
And so we got everything taken care of, and that was probably at least an hour of getting her and everything else done. And she said, I'm going to lay back down. So a lot of times she would sit up in the recliner and watch Andy Griffith. Andy Griffith played on my house
all the time.
Which was, when we were growing up, TV was
Yes.
the worst. She couldn't sit still long enough. But anyway, it gave her some comfort. And so I remember getting her all showered and cleaned up, and in her bed, her clean bed, she laid down. And I always tried not to get upset in front of her because I didn't want to scare her. But she looked up at me and she goes, now, honey, I'm going to see your dad real soon.
Are you referring to the time when she said, like, I'm going tomorrow? Or Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah. And, well, that was later that week. This was that Sunday morning.
Okay.
This was that Sunday morning. And she just said, and that was the first time since all of this that she knew I was her daughter, because she said, my dad, I'm going to see.
Oh,
so
and then on top of that, she knew that's where he was without you having to tell her that he was in heaven and she's going there.
And she did get a little better those last few days, if you remember.
Yes,
and that
she
is
did.
something.
She had some clarity, and I think that they say that's a sign the end is near. Yeah.
Right. And I remember walking into the kitchen, my husband was standing there, and he had already lost it. And he said, God gave you that. Because he knew I didn't tell anybody. I did tell you, but I didn't know who to talk to about the way I felt about God, because we're all in the ministry.
Right.
And I don't want a nephew to feel like my
aunt gave up.
Or she's confused.
Yes.
I didn't have that role. I couldn't go to someone in the church that.
And we should clarify, your pastor was your nephew.
My nephew.
And Nan's
and he would have
grandson.
talked to me.
So you're kind of like, this is hard to say this to him.
And I couldn't say this. I could not tell him.
I see.
And so, of course, my husband knew, and I had talked with you. But I felt like God gave me that time, that I won't ever forget that day. I'll never forget any of that. And I was trying to get out the door. I just patted her, kissed her on her head, and I said, now I'm going to leave this door open, so in case you need me, you might not holler loud enough. I'm just going to be right in the kitchen. And I made it to the kitchen because I didn't want her to be afraid.
Right.
I never wanted her to be afraid of anything.
Right.
Anything. And then I think it's all blurry to me. But did you and your family move in on Thursday or Wednesday? Was it Wednesday?
What day did she pass on?
Friday.
That's how bad my memory is.
Friday.
I would say I came on Tuesday.
Yes.
And then the boys
all were
throughout.
there. And my boys, it was a loaded house.
Yeah.
And I was very, very thankful. We played music. And she went into the death rattle for 4 days. And that was so horrible. But she knew that things were different. And she did say, I'm going to heaven. Your dad's going to pick me up Friday evening.
Yes, she did.
That's what she said, Friday evening. And she told the nurse that.
Yes.
She told her hospice nurse, she said, my husband's going to be here on Friday to take me, not to heaven, but to take me, to take her. And so we were up around the clock. No, I didn't.
Right there, those last days.
All of
2
us.
days, 2.5 days, 3 days.
All of us were there. We talked to her. She didn't talk much. And then by Wednesday night, Thursday, we started medicating.
Right.
Because our hospice nurse had said there was some, she didn't want her to have any pain, and she was doing some twitching, even though she wasn't really vocally talking.
Because the body gets into pain as it starves.
Yes, and so we kept her, I can remember every hour putting that medicine in her mouth, and I know it kept her comfortable. And
I remember playing songs about heaven,
yes.
and you could visibly see a change, like she would relax.
Yes. And boy, those last few, the last the last 24 hours, I think, were just, because we would think, she would take that big gasp, and then she would take another.
You think that was going to be the end.
I think it was, and then she got very quiet.
We need to tell about the dog, because this was so strange.
It was.
Katie had a new puppy, I guess you'd say, or
he kind of gotten bigger.
But, okay, but new, like
but he was new.
Not old enough to leave at home. She had the dog there,
and she was
with
staying
her.
Night and day. He was at the foot of her bed or the side of her bed, and she would make a move, and he was up. And that night, I'd say about 6:30, he was pacing.
Yes,
just pacing, trying to get any of us to pay any attention. And she was still doing the same type of breathing she'd been doing for days. And he, at about, I'd say 10 till 7 or so, he would not get on any bed. She'd trained him not to get up on the beds, and he didn't do it. And he looked at us, and he would wag and kind of hit each one of us around her bed. And finally, he just jumped up on the bed.
He did. I remember him just getting right up there, right beside her.
Right across. And like, if you're not going to do something,
he could tell she was actively dying.
And he knew that she was going. And when she took her last breath, you remember he whimpered and got up and left.
Yeah, and left. I mean, it was literally like he was saying to us, "Hey, do y'all realize what's happening? She is actually dying."
And see, that was
crazy.
That was extremely difficult for me. And my kids had questioned that from the get-go. I thought hospice would come, and they had been there 3 times that day. I'm certainly not saying anything against hospice, but when the time came, it was us.
Right.
And in your mind, you're thinking, if I called the rescue squad, could they save her?
Right. You panicked at that actual moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could I? Is she hurting and I don't know it? Is there something I should be doing? Because, and then you just had to assure yourself that this is what God planned.
Yeah.
And there's no hope.
Right.
And that was really...
God is taking her home. It is time.
Very hard. And I remember finally, once everything was done, and you don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. You don't know what to do when someone dies. I remember one son, one of mine and one of yours, that wouldn't leave the room. Do you remember that? They never ever left the room. And I was exhausted. I don't really remember a lot of it. And I remember my son, and Chris looked at me and said, "Mom, go lay down."
Well, I think it was a police officer in them. They kind of knew what all would happen.
Right.
How they would
and
come,
they both
what
told
they would
me,
do with the body, all
the things. They both told me, they said, you go and you lay down.
Let us be here for this.
And I am not leaving. Both of them said, we're not leaving this room.
Right.
And I thought, well, she's not here. So... okay.
Yes.
So I remember going and laying down, and this is how, because normally if things bother me, I can't sleep, but I must have just calmed. You were exhausted. Yes. It was about midnight, and I get a phone call, and they were still in there with my mom. And I remember thinking, who in the world would call me
at midnight?
But it was the funeral home coming to get her.
Yes.
So I was glad that I'd answered that. But anyway, I questioned so many things, and then you go through guilt. Should I, could have, would I, what should I have done to make her? And I beg God every day. I'm not there. I'm nowhere near at all. But I beg God every day to take those years away from my memory. Because I would find myself, even when she was alive, trying to go back and remember different things. And now I'll look at pictures and things, but I don't remember my mom.
As that.
I only remember as this.
Oh, this is so important. Not to define people by their suffering or their sin. I'm not calling her sin. I'm just saying, whether it's a sin someone did, whether it's a suffering they went through that demeaned their life, or whether something tragic or traumatic happened that took their life. As Jamie was saying in his, that's a moment in time, so to speak. it's not what their whole life was about.
Right.
And it's so important
But
not
I can't
to think
find
of them
that
like
yet.
that.
I-
Well, I mean,
you
you're
know,
still so close to all of it.
I can't get there. But trying. And truthfully, I have heard so much lately that has, and that's God thing. That's what it is.
Yes.
It's the healing coming to realize that I had compartmentalized so much that I didn't deal with Donnie. I didn't have time. I didn't deal with Dad. I couldn't do it in front of my mom. You know, I had to be strong. I had to be strong for the next thing.
Right.
And I'm glad that I could, but yet it took a toll.
It does. It takes
It
a
took
toll
a
on your
toll.
physical health.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
you hear people saying that after they've cared for someone, I can think of numerous people that after someone has passed that has required maybe a long journey with cancer or dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, their caretaker just basically physically and mentally falls apart afterwards because you've neglected these things.
And people tell
Embrace
you all
yourself.
through. I had people, and they meant well. You've got to find time for yourself. You've got to do some things for yourself. And I will be honest, I never figured where you could do that.
Right.
I didn't. And it wasn't that I didn't want to. It wasn't that I was trying to be a martyr, because I certainly was not. But I just couldn't figure those things out. I think that in the last few weeks, when he was talking the other day about the difference between grief and trauma, I have trauma.
Yes.
And I don't need to think about that trauma, because that trauma won't do me any good.
Right.
The grief I have, that's a good thing.
Right.
It isn't, but it's a growth, and you're gonna grieve because you loved.
Exactly.
You loved. And so that's just a part of this life. But separating the two, try not to remember those sights and sounds and, you know, those different things.
Smells, everything that appeals to the senses.
Yes.
You
And
go
then when
through.
he said the other night that this world, you know, this is not, it's a broken world. And we are not designed for death. I never thought about that.
Yeah, God did not. We were not created to die. We were not created to ever go through someone around us dying.
Right.
And our broken and sin-filled world allowed that to be a part of our journey. And God has given us so much to help us with it.
Right.
But yet, I think grief never really going away. You just carry it differently.
Right.
Is that constant reminder that this is not our home. And, you know, it won't really be all right until we are in heaven and with our Father.
You told me one day, you said, you know, you never know with this dementia, because I was just so, why? You know, I knew very little. I didn't know my husband's mom had this, but we weren't there. We would just go in and see her, but, you know, not day to day. She was actually in a home. So I didn't have that experience. And I couldn't figure it. And you told me one time, you said, you know, Kathy, you never know. You might be able to help somebody.
Yes.
And there is a girl that I check on. I met her in the oddest way. And her mom is going through the same thing, only she's not a Christian.
Oh, wow.
The mom,
That's hard.
the girl was saved when she was a teenager. And so I'll never forget when she realized, she said, I've got so many questions. And I said, well, I don't have answers, but I know a lot more than I knew before.
Right.
So I went through some of the don'ts and some of the questions I had.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
We appreciate you joining us today at Speak Your Grief with Sonia. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube as new episodes are added weekly. Thank you again for joining us as we unpack our grief. We hope you have been reminded that you are not alone in this journey.